Guys, the new Genshin patch is near, and the new banners have been officialized. Quite a stacked patch, not gonna lie. We obviously have Skirk, that is very anticipated, very hyped, arguably one of the best characters in the game in Mavuika, and pretty nice supports for their niche, so Emilie and Shenhe. In this video, we'll analyze these characters and advise you on whether or not you should pull for them. I will start from Skirk since she is the new character. I already made quite a few recent videos on her, but in this one, I'll tackle directly whether or not she's worth pulling for your account. Some very common knowledge is that Skirk is a top tier DPS with the condition you have Escoffier on your account. In fact, Skirk has several things in her kit that limit her to being played only with Hydro or Cryo characters, so freeze compositions, and this archetype only really works super well with Escoffier on team. While Escoffier can be replaced by characters that can do one of the things she does, like support, healing, or damage, there is really nobody that does all the things she does at once. And the result is that with Escoffier on team, Skirk could very easily be a top 3 DPS in the game, but without, she's probably worse than any DPS that released in Natlan. And the real limiting factor here is not even that Escoffier is so strong, so much stronger than any alternative, it's just that Skirk is so limited in terms of team construction that even in the future, it's hard to imagine she'll get many great alternatives, at least in the immediate future. Now, if you can get Skirk's signature weapon and constellations, you can make up for the lack of Escoffier, but you can make this argument for any DPS in the game, because Skirk's constellations and signature aren't really stronger than what other DPSs got recently. But it's still worth mentioning, because if you really like Skirk and you plan to hyper invest in her, you can make her strong even without Escoffier, so at least that's good. She can also work as a sub DPS, because her elemental burst is really strong, so she can be used as a nuker on teams, for example on Nouvellette teams, but she still relies on Escoffier even in those compositions, so there is that. Teammates-wise, the only real must-have is Escoffier, but she also has Furina as her best in slot, because Furina is the best Hydro option. Among other options, we have Shenhe, Yelan, and even characters like Moalani and Citlali that typically are not supports for this type of team. Moalani is not even a support to begin with, because she's a DPS, but both of these characters can hold Thrilling Tales and the Cinder City set to provide plenty of buffs for the team. But really, as long as you have Skirk and Escoffier on team, and if you have Furina even better, you can add pretty much any 1 or 2 characters on the team and it will be at least great. So even characters like Mona, Xingqiu, Rosaria, Keia, all of them can work decently. Speaking about Cryo, let's talk about Shenhe now, the Cryo dedicated support that came out a couple years ago. Honestly, by herself, Shenhe hasn't aged super well. Even at release, she was not considered a must-get because the buffs she provides are nice, but they're not super impressive. And so even characters that are not dedicated supports, but are good general supports like Kazuha, Shilonen, have been able to match her and surpass her on her teams. But what gave her a new life is, once again, Escoffier. Escoffier is good for her because she limits the teams to only having Hydro and Cryo characters, and so Shenhe becomes one of the best options for these teams because they don't have characters like Kazuha or Shilonen available. And also, Shenhe is a very good buffer for Escoffier's own damage, and so the teams where Escoffier reaches her damage ceiling typically have Shenhe in them. But still, it's not like she's a must pull for her niche. Like, she's very good. She's a very good option for Skirk, Ayaka, Ganyu, Vrizzly on the freeze teams with Escoffier, but it's not like she's way stronger than her alternatives. And so, honestly, as a dedicated support, she's still somewhat disappointing to this day. Aside from the obvious synergy with Cryo DPSs, we also have other uses for Shenhe, like for example on Chaska team. The Chaska Shenhe team was actually arguably her best team, the best Chaska team before Citlali came out. Also, since her Cryo application is not bad, she fits as a second Cryo player on those Melt, Arlecchino or Mavuika teams, in combination with somebody like Citlali. And also, she fits as a possible 4th option, 4th slot on those Nouvellette freeze teams with Escoffier. Before I move on, let me remind you that if you enjoy my channel but you haven't subbed yet, please consider doing so because it really makes me notice your support. Now let's talk about Emilie, a Dendro sub DPS that specifically fits in the burning niche. Honestly, Emilie is pretty good still, but I don't think she aged that well. The reason is that back when Kinich came out, she was arguably the best option for his teams, but besides that, she was also a pretty great option for mono pyro teams, for example on Arlecchino, Line teams, and also she had a use on the vape teams with a Hydro main DPS, like for example the Nuvolette teams or the Moalani teams. While she's still to this day a very good option for Kinich, the other uses I've listed, so the Mono Pyro and vape teams, became pretty niche. Mono Pyro lost value because of Citlali that came out and introduced melt compositions for pretty much every Pyro DPS in the meta, and the thought of running a Mono Pyro Arlecchino team or Mavuika team is just kind of laughable compared to a melt Arlecchino or Mavuika team. In a similar way, a character like Nuvolette has other options now, because he got Shilonen on his teams, now Escoffier and their Fritz teams, and so both of these options are just better than those vape Emilie teams. On the flip side, for Kinich, I would argue she got even more valuable now compared to when she came out. The reason is that back when she came out, she was competing with Furina on that team, and even though I think Emilie was still better, Furina was a very competitive choice. Now, Furina isn't as good on the best Kinich teams because Shenling got replaced by Mavuika, and while Mavuika provides more offensively for Kinich specifically thanks to her support, her pyro application isn't as good as Shenling, and so Furina's Hydro application is more painful, more hurtful on the Kinich teams now. And so the Kinich, Emilie, and Mavuika core works better than any Furina variant. And also her investment scaling is pretty nice because she's got a good signature weapon and constellations. The constellations are really nice. The signature weapon is not a must-have. It is a significant damage increase compared to the free-to-play options, and also it adds some quality of life by making her restore energy more efficiently, but the constellations is where it's at, because the constellation 1 is around a 30% damage increase for her, which is pretty much as good as it gets for a constellation 1. And the constellation 2 makes her reduce the opponent's resistance to Dendro by 30%, among other things, so it's a good damage increase for her own output, and also a team-wide damage increase if you're playing her with Kinich. Next up we have Mavuika, quite obviously the best character of the next banner cycle. Honestly, if anybody told me that they believe Mavuika is the best character in the game, I wouldn't say it's a particularly atrocious take. She's probably the best DPS in the game, the numbers she can achieve are just absurd, and on top of that, she's a very good sub DPS and a pretty good support for plenty of teams. She's still reliant on having Natran allies, but now the Natran pool of units became larger because she also got Jansan as a new support, we got Ororon for free, and of course there are Citlali, Shilonen, so she became easier to use. As a sub DPS, she's notably the best option for the Chevreuse Overload teams, in particular for the Chlorend variant and the Varesa variant, and with Varesa being one of the best DPSs in the game, some would argue even third best, Mavuika being the best choice for that team makes her pretty valuable even when she's not used as a main DPS. But honestly, she does so much damage with her elemental burst that it's ridiculous, like it's just ridiculous. She is a pretty good option at the very least for any team that can magnify that attack. For example, on the Chaska teams, Chaska is a character that likes to have cryo allies on team because she benefits from that herself. If you can manage to make Mavuika melt her elemental burst attack off of that, she will just deal so much damage that she arguably becomes the carry of that team, even when used as a sub DPS. And then as a main DPS, her melt team with Citlali is probably the best team in the game still, but even on alternative options like Vape, Overload with Chevreuse, she is still really good, just not as absurd as on melt teams, but still arguably the best DPS in the game. On top of that, her investment scaling is really meaningful. Her signature weapon is pretty strong, but her constellations are just dramatically powerful, because the Constellation 1 significantly increases her output, but also making her easier to use without Natran allies, and then the Constellation 2 increases her damage from anywhere between 30 and 40%, which is just overpowered, and when she's played as a sub DPS, it makes her reduce the defense of opponents, so it's a team-wide damage increase, so it even makes her a better support. In terms of allies, her best teammate, her only staple is Bennett, which is ironic because he's not from Natlan, but even then is pretty much in all of her best teams, so he's the staple. And then Citlali, Yansan, and Shilonen are her best in slot options because they make her best team, the male team, where Citlali is kind of the protagonist because she applies cryo, and then you use Bennett, and then as the last piece, you can either use Yansan or Shilonen, where Yansan is better if you have a Constellation 6, otherwise it's kind of similar. Then, as I said earlier, the Vape teams with Furina and the Chevreuse Overload teams are pretty good choices, but just not best in slot. And then we have all characters that are nice alternatives on her teams, like Kazuha replacing Shilonen, Ororon on the Overload teams, the Cryo characters to be paired with Citlali on a double Cryo Mel team for Mavuika. All of these are pretty great. Mavuika will perform amazingly with any of them because she's just that strong. And so while Mavuika is kind of limiting in terms of team building because she does require Natran allies, if you have at least a good one like Yansan, Shilonen, and Citlali, and then you also use Bennett on team, you have many different options for the 4th slot, so she's not really super restricted. And with this, I'm done for today. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe, and bye.